Hello, Trail Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Today's interview is amazing. I can't wait for you to listen to it. I had such a fun time interviewing Daniel DeBaun, and he brings such a wealth of information and actionable steps for you to take to protect yourself against the types of invisible radiation that we're constantly exposed to between cell phones, Wi-Fi, and everything else. So we talk about all kinds of amazing topics, and he gives great advice. So definitely strap yourselves in. You're in for a wonderful treat today. Please share this episode with all your friends who are interested in achieving better health, especially those women who want to conceive healthfully. He discusses the proven effects of radio frequency signals on miscarriages and on birth defects and increased cancer rates in children and in babies. So things that are quite serious and definitely affecting the population. A lot of science is coming out, a lot of research is coming out, proving that we really need to take some steps to reduce the amount of radiation that we're being exposed to, the electromagnetic radiation and the frequencies from all these different devices that we're being exposed to every day. Now, we talk a lot about physical health in the Learn True Health podcast, and sometimes we get into emotional health, mental health, spiritual health, energetic health. So we kind of go off on these different tangents, but they all relate back to increasing the overall health of your life. There's a really great podcast I want you to check out. It's called My 7 Chakras. I've actually really enjoyed this podcast in the past. I first was turned on to him. He launched a few months before I launched. So I watched as he took off, and now I think he just published episode 250. And so it's just cool to see he's also sort of in the alternative health space. And it's just been great to see how we have very similar interests. He dives deeper into energetic health, spiritual health. He talks about Ayurveda, Reiki, energy healing, chakra balancing, using your intuition, and it goes into experts that explain more about yogic practices. But he also has a lot of similar guests from my podcast. So I have a feeling that his listeners would enjoy my show and my listeners would enjoy his show. So I definitely recommend checking out My 7 Chakras. You can find it on iTunes. It's right up there in the alternative medicine section. I'll make sure that there's a link to it in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com so you guys can check it out. I also wanted to let you know that the truth about vaccines, which I've talked about before on the show, is doing a free viewing. So once a year, twice a year, they allow people to watch their entire docuseries for free. It's a 7-day event where every day you're emailed a link and you're able to watch about a 90-minute video that'll blow your mind. It did for me, and I've interviewed a lot of the experts on the show because of the truth about vaccines. It's created by Ty Bollinger, who created the truth about cancer and the truth about pet cancer, both very powerful health docu-series, meaning it's like a documentary over several days, like a series of these documentary videos. So you can watch it for free. Go to learntruehealth.com/vaccines. That's learntruehealth.com/vaccines. Of course, that link will also be in the show notes of this episode. It's free. Check it out. Whether you are pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine or on the fence or just kind of confused and want to be an ostrich sticking your head in the ground, I get it. This documentary series interviews doctors and experts on both sides of the argument, and it's not about forcing people or to come to one side or the other. It's really about just sharing the truth, because we need to have informed consent. We need to understand how the immune system works, what is in a vaccine, what it does to the body, and the benefits and the costs. Most of the time when we go to an MD, they're not going to tell us the costs. They're just going to tell us the benefits. And if you ask for the insert of the vaccine, they might even get a little upset because they don't want us to challenge the status quo. And that's not informed consent. Informed consent is when doctors happily, calmly, without emotion, share all of the positives and all of the negatives and allow us and support us in making the best decisions possible for ourselves and for our children. So that's why the truth about vaccines is one of the most powerful things you can do, especially as a parent. You can watch this with your family and educate yourselves so that you are in the know and you can make healthy, informed choices moving forward in your life. I'm really excited to bring that information to you because watching it for me when it first came out changed my world. And I'm here today to help you do the same. Excellent. Well, enjoy today's show. I know you will. Thank you so much for being a listener. And if you guys have any questions or if you want to connect with me or the other listeners, come join us in our Facebook group. Just search Learn True Health in Facebook and come on in. We love chatting about everything that has to do with holistic health and healing. Have a fantastic day. Enjoy today's interview. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 288. I am so excited for today's guest. We have on Daniel DeBaun. He's the creator of DefenderShield.com. This has been a growing concern of mine, the idea that the electronics that we're exposed to on a daily basis are harming us. And I've had some experts on the show talk about how we need to avoid holding a cell phone, avoid having it even in our pocket. People even say avoid being near laptops or having headphones on our head, and how damaging the electromagnetic radiation can be for our DNA, for on a cellular level. I even had Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt on the show talk about how he helps children reverse autism. And one of the things he does is remove them from an environment that has a Wi-Fi signal, because Wi-Fi vibrates at 60 hertz, which vibrates the heavy metals in their nervous system and does damage. And when he removes them from Wi-Fi, of all things, and also helps them to do heavy metal detoxification, that they no longer have the symptoms of autism. So this is a growing issue, and because we can't smell it, we can't see it, and everyone's exposed to it, we sort of drink the Kool-Aid and think that everything is safe, just like we thought using x-rays to measure our feet in our shoes at shoe stores was safe back in the day when x-rays first came out, or dousing children with pesticides was safe back in the day. So or leaded gasoline was safe back in the day. We think something's safe until it's finally proven, after many people have suffered, it's finally proven that it's not safe. So we have an expert here today who's going to share with us what we can do, since we can't all go up into the mountain and meditate in the cave and live away from society, away from EMF. That just isn't practical. It's not practical to never be around a cell phone or never be around a headset or a laptop. So Daniel's here today to share with us what we can do to protect ourselves and also teach us more about how electromagnetic pollution is affecting us. So we really have an understanding. Daniel, I'm so excited to have you here today.
Ashley, thank you so much for inviting me. I really, really appreciate an opportunity to share with you and your audience some of the overwhelming facts about the potential body concerns we have with the exposures we all exhibit today, just in daily life. So thanks an awful lot for inviting us. I look forward to our chat today.
Absolutely. Now, your assistant emailed me yesterday and let me know that you are offering 20% off to our listeners. So if any of them are motivated to buy one of your products, because you have an incredible line of products, like very affordable earbuds, for example, that are low EMF. And I own a pair very similar. I didn't know about your company, and now I'm interested because I know how high quality yours are. Um, and so you are offering 20% off. So if someone wants to get something that's going to protect them from, like, shield them from the pollution, the coupon code is LTH, as in Learn Your Health. So LTH gives them 20% off when they go to your website, defendershield.com. I'd love to get into your story. What led you to become an expert in this and create your company?
It's a great story. For probably 25, 30 years, I ran, I led the standards development and the testing environments for telecommunications products for the Bell system, which is a very large consortium of service providers, research companies. Bell Labs was the research group I worked in. And I had a lot of background in technology. And in fact, no technology could be introduced into the Bell system without going through my laboratories. We would make sure that the standards were, the products that were being potentially introduced were compliant to the standards we had in the system. So I was quite familiar with the technology environment, particularly the telecom environment, because that's where I was in the telecom space. So I actually retired from that space at a fairly young age, and it turns out about 5, 6 years ago, my sons were visiting, and they had laptops on their lap for hours at a time. And so my wife turned around and said, that can't be good for you. Get it off your laps. So she had some intuitive belief that this could be potentially dangerous. So she doesn't have a science background, but she does have intuition, because it turned out I knew exactly what the concerns should be, if there was at all. And at that point, I certainly didn't think there was a concern, but I thought maybe it made a little bit of sense to try to investigate and see if there was, in fact, any scientific literature that talked about the potential dangers of exposures from personal devices, portable devices around us, and in this case, the laptop. So I went and looked at the medical research, which is something I'm reasonably familiar with doing. And I was actually stunned that there seemed to be quite a lot of evidence that prolonged exposures to the soft parts, soft tissues of the body could be damaging, and pretty seriously. So I said, well, maybe if the boys are going to be using their laptops, I got to sort of figure a way of protecting them, if that's the case. And so what I did was, being familiar with the mineral and magnetic materials, shielding materials, all sorts of the materials that could potentially be used for shielding. I knew what the problem was. I knew that it was not only the 60 cycle, by the way, but also the other stuff that was being generated to connect to the Wi-Fi that was a problem. So I actually put together a couple of products that were prototypes given to my boys and said, use these. They began using them. Their friends began asking for them. So I started building a couple of for them, and it basically snowballed from there. My conclusion was that it was a problem, and that we weren't going to be victims from the technology in our environment. And I figured, let's try to fix it if it's possible with that we control. And so the starting point was, my wife wanted grandchildren. That's why she was concerned. And that was 5, 6 years ago. And of course, today I still don't have grandchildren.
It's so funny. I hear so many people complaining about their millennial children, starting later in life. Well, that's the thing.
Right,
The
exactly.
30-year-olds are like, hey, I can have kids in my 40s.
Yeah, there's only so much I can do, right? I tried.
My chiropractor says he keeps having dog grandchildren. All of his children keep bringing home more dogs and adopting dogs, and so he's like, if you guys start having real kids, he's threatening to move to Ireland, and which is really saddening me because I love my chiropractor, so I'm like, whatever I can do to encourage your kids to start having grandkids. But millennials, we gotta take our time.
It's funny. 2 years ago, my younger son called me up and said, "Hey, do you want a dog?" I said, "Absolutely not. I finally got rid of you. As you know, I finally have my house back." And a week later, he brought a dog with his other brother. So, and that was like a consolation prize I got, rather than grandchildren.
Well, you certainly are helping so many people with your products. Can you talk a bit about, since, obviously you started doing this with your wife's intuition and also knowing some of the science of how this is harmful, can you get into painting the picture? What exactly is harming us? What is EMF, or what are cell phones and tablets and cell everything, all the stuff we're using, Wi-Fi modems? What is
Right,
it
right.
emitting that's hurt? Since we can't see it, what's this like unseen, these wavelengths, and why are they hurt? Like, what is it about them that are harmful?
Okay, let me give you a picture in your mind of the sources and what these sources can create. And then I can actually give you another image to help you sort of have it materialize in your mind about how it moves into the environment that we live in. Um, when a tablet, when a motor, when a hair blower, or any device is plugged into the wall and it's operating electronically, there is a admission that occurs, a radiation that occurs that's below 300 hertz. In other words, you mentioned 60 cycle, that's 60 hertz. In the US, we have alternating current. It's 110 volt, 120 volt, and it operates at 60 cycles. So it's oscillating. And so when that power is being consumed by the electronics, there's a byproduct that occurs. The byproduct is extremely low frequency emissions. It's the stuff that comes out of your wall from the electronics operating. Anytime there's current, anytime there's a light bulb lit, anytime a motor is running, there is a extremely low frequency emission coming out of the devices, the walls, the wires over your on your telephone poles. Everything that generates a current generates a emission that's extremely low frequency. Then there's the other type. It's like when you want to connect to something, you have to create a connection, a way of connecting from one device to a next. So if you want to connect to a cell phone and call a friend, you have your cell phone connecting to a cell tower. There's a physical connection. That's a radio frequency connection, an RF signal. That RF is another form of radiation that's occurring. So when you use a laptop and you're connected to your Wi-Fi to get internet access, that's a RF signal that is allowing you to make that communications. It actually is a frequency, and the information rides within that frequency, and that's how you communicate. So there's two forms: the kind that's generated as a byproduct of use of electronics, and the other part is the RF that's used to communicate from one device to the next. And this is where you want to think about. I mentioned it was 300 hertz and below. Typically 60 hertz for the ELF. The RF is around 1 gigahertz. A Wi-Fi is around 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. So it's much faster and it's different. So what is a hertz? Think of it this way. If you went to the beach and you saw a very, very low wave, really quiet day, they're really small, and pretend there's a pole in the water, and you see a wave going by. You see the crest of the wave, the top of the wave go by, and then you see the next one go by. And let's say it's 1 second. Well, that's what a RF or a extreme low frequency is. A hertz is 1 cycle per second. When I said a billion, when I said RF or 2 gigahertz, 1 gigahertz for the cell phone, 2 gigahertz around for the Wi-Fi, that's 1 billion of those waves going by that pole in 1 second. So it's a gradual increase in the frequency that becomes a carrier for the content that you're trying to put, whether it be voice or data. So that's a quick summary. Another thing also to note, and why I actually started developing products the way I have, is take your finger, your first finger, stick it up into the air, and pretend there's a tiny little ball that's beginning to emanate. It keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a ball that all of a sudden fills the room. That's what is known as a omnidirectional frequency. It goes in all direction. When I build products, I actually stop it from going in the direction towards the body. So you got to remember, if you're using a Wi-Fi and you're connecting your laptop to your Wi-Fi router, that signal that's connecting, that 2.4 gigahertz that's connecting, is actually hitting you too. And it's actually going through walls as well. Remember, your router could be in another room, and yet you still can communicate with it. So it's physically going through walls. Guess what? It's going through you as well, to some extent.
What are the health issues? Because some people would say, well, it's safe. They said it was safe. And look, we can listen to the radio, and those are frequencies, and all of this has been proven safe. The skeptics. Let's talk to the skeptics. What harm does it do to our body to have these cycles go through us?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll introduce the answer. If you think back when these products, these portable products began coming out, let's say 20, 30 years ago, in the US is the FCC standard for how much power comes out of a cell phone. So when that standard was created 30 years ago, there was a 6-foot male, mature male, that would occasionally use that cell phone. It was based on occasional use. And that RF signal, that about 1 gigahertz signal, would go in to the head of that male by 1 inch on the average, and it would heat it up by 2 degrees. So if that was the standard then, I got to remind everyone that 30 years ago, when I had a cell phone, I had no one to call because my friends couldn't afford one. So occasional use was really, really occasional use. What's changed is that all of a sudden, all these incredibly important devices that we have really become an integral part of our lives for communicating and computing, it's now sitting on top of us. Let's think about this. If you have a child using that same cell phone, using that same standard, it doesn't go 1 inch through their head. It doesn't heat up by 2 degrees. It goes completely through their head at 6 years old, roughly. And it heats the whole brain. And so do we really know what the impact of that is yet? No, because this stuff's only been around for the last 10 years. And as you just pointed out before in your intro, it takes many, many, many years before we really know the impact of the pollutants around us that we introduce into our environments. And RF can be considered a pollutant. So what is an RF signal? What is a 1 gigahertz? No, let's talk about a Wi-Fi. What does a 2.4 gigahertz really mean? And why is that potentially a problem? Well, let's talk about microwave ovens. A microwave oven, when you take a piece of meat and put it into the oven and you close it and you turn it on, you are cooking your meat. Well, what's actually happening? The water in between the cells are activating the cells to oscillate faster and faster and faster. Thus, you have cooked meat. A microwave uses a 2.3 gigahertz transmission, a radiation. Remember, Wi-Fi is 2.4. The difference is the power levels are different, but it's literally the same frequency. So where before this stuff was far away from us, all of a sudden now it's really, really close. And that's why today it's now becoming more clear there's more of a danger than it was 10 years ago even. So what are the dangers? I'm going to talk to your female audience right now. Probably more than 20% of the world population that's exposed to the cell phone, the Wi-Fi, they become electric hypersensitive. We know that from looking at the statistics over the last several years, and it's a growing number. What does that mean? Well, if you have a cell phone close to your head, you get a headache really fast. You pick up your cell phone and your hands tingle. You may have your eyes hurting and you don't know why. You may have so many other symptoms that are literally correlated to the RF exposures typically. And there is electrohypersensitive. Your body's saying, stop exposing. That's why I'm giving you a headache. What's actually happening when you do that is there's one cell that's adjacent to another cell, and they're saying, I'm not going to give you proteins. I'm going to protest. I'm not going to work the way I'm supposed to. So what happens is you have these symptoms that are occurring to various parts of the body. So it can be that level of impact to your body, and I can guarantee you more than 20% of your listening audience that are female have that problem. But then there is also the more serious potential, and it's what can impact the cell at a cellular level, as well as impact the systems of your body. And what we know from Dr. Paul and so many others, exposures today from a cell phone, for example, if it's exposed enough, there is a potential where the membrane of the cell that's protecting the cell itself can weaken and weaken and weaken. And then it gets to the point where it's so weak, there is a calcium channel breakthrough into the cell. When that cell does that, oxide builds up, a bunch of other things happen within the cell, and all of a sudden you have DNA damaged cell, mutated cells. And so we know without any question that extensive exposures, more than several hours, you can anticipate having problems at the cellular level, particularly to the soft parts of the body. And so we know that for sure. And let's say you have a cell phone near your bed at night, and you're maybe not sleeping as well. Well, remember, there's like 4,500 processes within the body that's occurring beyond the cell. And the creation of melatonin, for example, is interrupted by an RF signal. And so all of a sudden, we have body processes like I can't sleep well. My eyes are literally becoming more dry as a result of the exposures to the emissions from the screen of my laptop or my tablet. So there are many additional and sometimes more serious things that can occur that are directly related to exposures. I'll give you an example. There is, we know for sure that, you've heard probably of a cell phone in the bra of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
What's actually happening? It's soft tissue. Remember, soft tissue is more potentially susceptible than your fingers. You'll never hear of anybody getting cancer of the hand from an RF signal, but that's not true when you talk about soft parts of the body. You need to think about the potentials for long-term exposures. And here's one example of the DNA we were talking about a moment ago being damaged. Let's say you have double-stranded DNA damage to the egg of a 12-year-old girl losing a laptop on her lap for 4 or 5 hours at a time. Let's say that happens. We know that, in fact, it does. So there is a potential that the egg that's within that 12-year-old girl is now potentially carrying a damaged DNA cell. That damaged DNA cell could be the cell that is used to create her child. That child could have that damaged DNA cell within this new child. So there are concerns, and I'm not sure I agree about the magnitude of that concern, but there are some experts who are talking about the potential of having these kind of devices in front of us that actually doing damage to generations to come when they do the damaged DNA cell, double-stranded DNA that repairs and it becomes a problem over time. So there's those kinds of potential damages, and we have a whole host of a lot of research that's been really done recently that supports those basic concepts.
Can you tell us a bit about the research, or is there a study that stands out in your mind?
Oh yeah, there are actually the National Toxicity Program is a division of the federal government. They actually went out 2 years ago and spent $25 million to prove in an epidemiology study, a statistically significant epidemiology study, that there was no concern about cell damage from an RF signal. They literally took transmitters from a cell phone and they put it into their test environment. And they radiated this population, epidemiology population. What they found was there was an increase of frontal lobe brain cancer and heart cancers that were statistically significantly higher than the general population didn't have that exposure. So there was what they set out to do is prove that it wasn't a problem, and the reverse happened. There was a confirmation of that study. Rosini Institute in Italy did in fact, even a larger study, which was a consortium. It was a consortium of scientific experts around Europe that participated in their epidemiology study, and they confirmed that there was direct links and increases to cancer tumor in the those who are exposed and those who are not, statistically significant differences. So we know that there's those studies which are large-scale, statistically significant studies, but then there is many, I mean, in the orders of thousands and thousands of studies over the last 5 years that look at the breakdown of a cell. For example, Dr. Paul, I mentioned before, when I talked about the breakdown of the cell, he was probably one of the first PhDs over the last 5 years to actually look at how it breaks down. And I really applauded him because before his work, we really didn't know the mechanics of the breakdown, but now we do have a fairly substantive understanding. Then there was a Dr. Ali Johansson out of Sweden. He has been doing research for 30 years in this subject, and he had a study that he performed, a clinical study he performed, and he found not only was the cell diminishing, but it was also the immune system was being suppressed as a result of the exposure. So that's why some people were more susceptible than others, because their own immune system was being broken down from this.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, that's the part where, remember I mentioned that 20% or more of the women respond, having this negative response with hypersensitivity. That now starts making sense to me when we found that those kinds of exposures actually had suppression, not only cell damage, but suppression as well. And the more susceptible were women, believe it or not. So the important point I'm making here is that there are a lot of studies that are not statistically significant on their own. In other words, the populations weren't large enough to drive confidence levels of their study work that says this is definitely a situation. So there's always been that concern that with all these studies, you can't conclude it. That's why there's a bit of controversy in the space. But this is the point, at the point that I like to describe statistics, because we really need to understand why you can't conclude something on Dr. Ali's work, for example. He may have had 100 participants. He may have had 200. Statistically, you can't conclude based on that study that it can be generalized to the population. The statistical sample was too small. What does that mean? Well, the way I can prove to you that a child can be endangered by a RF router transmission is by taking 10,000 children, put them in a room, radiate them for 2 years, and then see who dies. In other words, the 10,000 kids would be sufficient as a statistical sample base. And if some people died, then, and it was higher than the average population, I could prove that irradiation can affect you and be confident by 95% that it was true. So where these naysayers are saying what Dr. Ali had concluded is not conclusive, they're correct. But if you look at the metadata, that is, you go above and look at all the studies that have been done, and you can look at their findings, you find that the direction of exposures is dangerous to the body. Metadata is pretty clear. And then we have people like the Bio Initiative. They're probably 100 or so of the researchers in the medical community that have been in the last few years documenting the evidence, the current evidence of what exposures do to the body. So I would encourage your listeners, look for the Bio Initiative study work. These are dedicated scientists that really their goal is to try to understand what it is our environment is, and make sure it's clear to everyone what those things can do to your body. And they're very, very comprehensive at what they do. And I would encourage people to really follow up on that.
I've heard that they found that the mitochondria is affected, that it suppresses the mitochondria for a few hours after using a cell phone. Like I had I don't know if you've heard of him on the show. It was way back when I was like around episode 54 or 56, something like that. I had Sal LaDuca on the
Yep.
show,
Yep.
and he is is an outspoken, educator around this industry. So I think you've heard of Sal LaDuca by your
Yeah.
response.
Yeah.
And he talked about that having a cell phone near the brain, that they discovered that it has the mitochondria of the cells sort of go to sleep for a few hours. And now, for those who don't know what mitochondria are, they're the powerhouse of the cell. They produce energy.
Absolutely. In fact, what you remind me, when I did the study work, when I was sort of understanding the space many years ago, the male sperm was 25% of the male sperm was immobile after 4 hours of exposure. And mitochondria, that was being affected.
When you say exposure, do you mean like a cell phone in a man's
Yeah, yeah,
pocket, like
yeah,
back pocket, middle pocket, or
yeah.
like sitting in between their legs? My husband, oh, it drives me crazy.
It,
He will
it,
put his
it
cell phone in between his legs, right by, the family jewels. And
yeah,
I want to
no,
have
no,
more kids, so I like
no,
grab it away from
no,
him.
don't do that. It really does impact potentially serious, and there are potentially long-term impacts. It's not just the temporary immobility of the current sperm. And by the way, for women, we know under exposures, there was a very large-scale study in Japan, maybe 10 years ago, and they looked at exposures to the womb and they found that there was a 2% growth rate of tumor in
Mm,
the groin area of the woman. And of that group, a percentage became cancerous.
mm,
So we know from that study that it's not just males. We know it's females as well. So you really, and yeah, I've mentioned this before, and I'll say it again. It's the soft tissue of the body. It's the groin area of the male and female. It's the breasts of a woman. It's the heart of man and woman. It's the brain, the frontal lobe brain, not the back parts of the brain. It's the frontal lobe. And there are circumstances that actually worsen that. Here's a tiny bit of detail that is somewhat interesting for me. It turns out that uh, let's say you have a concussion. Your mom dropped you on your head when you were 12 years old. You were a big baby, and you had a concussion. What that likely means is you had a blood-brain barrier that was um, diminished as a result of that, and you go through life having that diminished blood-brain barrier. Blood-brain barriers are to protect your body. In the sense parts of the body, we have blood-brain barriers. The head is just one of those places. Well, what does it actually mean as an exposure, having a blood-brain barrier that's diminished, and using a cell phone to the frontal lobe? What does that really mean? What I haven't mentioned up to this point is the power levels of a cell phone. The power level of a cell phone in the US is 1.6 watts. 1.6. Just all you got to do, remember 1.6. They're not really that strong. They're considered a low level energy. But these low level energies over exposures, long exposures, can be damaging. And we've talked about that. But what happens if the blood brain barrier has been diminished? That is, it's not protecting the frontal lobe. What does that mean? What it means is you can have 0.1 watts per kilogram, 0.1, 15 times smaller power level, and there can be potential DNA damaged cells. That's what it means. So those sensitive parts of the body become actually more sensitive when you have certain conditions within the body, in this case, blood-brain barrier breakdown. So it doesn't take much. And you really should be careful when you're around this technology and think about it as a potential concern for the body, and where you're putting it around your body are pretty important considerations. In fact, I never put a cell phone close to me. It's always a couple of feet away from me. It's not a big deal. I still have access to it, but that a little bit of distance really is a major protection for me. It's true of all technologies.
We're going to talk about in this episode how to protect ourselves. We're going to get into some strategies.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your book, but first, I want to talk about the 5G network that's coming out. Can you talk a bit for those who have no idea? So we know that 4G right now is the fastest sort of speed. Our cell phone connects to cell towers and gets 4G in more populated areas, right?
Yeah.
I remember when 3G came out. I remember when my phone, I had a cell phone back, geez, I don't know. I had one in the late 90s. My parents had cell phones in the early 90s, you know, when it was $1 a minute.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, and I had one in the late 90s. And I remember when I was living in Canada at the time, and we went from analog to digital. Like
Yep.
100% of all the cell phones had to go digital. And they had like, you know, we had a certain amount of time to sort of like catch up. And I got a new Motorola. And I remember even back then, I was aware of this, you know, this potential for damage. So I bought one of these little, it was made of stone, and it was sort of a button that like a sticker that I stuck on the back of my cell phone. It was supposed to lower the EMF or whatever, the pollution out of my phone. I don't know whether it worked or not, but again, back in the 90s, we didn't sit with phones by our ear. They weren't smartphones. We wouldn't sit with them by our ears for hours and hours
Right.
because it was $1 a minute.
Right.
But I
Our
remember,
usage was very low at that time, and there was
right.
no problems at that time.
Right, but I do remember my head heating up, and still to this day, if I have a cell phone near my head, my ear sweats, my head heats up, and I'll feel very weird. Like I feel kind of off balance and almost dizzy. And so I know it's definitely affecting
Well,
me.
Ashley, I just told you why.
Yeah.
It's a microwave signal. It is heating up the water between the cells, oscillating, and you're literally heating up the areas. It's literally happening when you have a cell phone next to your head. It's a microwave signal.
It's not healthy, it's not safe. So now
No.
we know the 3G network came out, then the 4G network came out, and no one really talked about the safety of 3G or 4G, but now we're about to have 5G come out this year in Seattle and in
Yeah.
metro, you know, in big cities. Um and I'm starting to hear from, you know, the more, I mean, it's you always hear from like the people on the fringe first, right? The
Right.
whistleblowers are always the ones that are sort of
Right.
put on, you know, thrown on the fire as witches, right? We're kind of like
Right. Yeah.
we're
Right. Right.
crucified for bringing this information to the public. But here you are, one of the whistleblowers. Can you tell us what you know about 5G and why we really need to be worried about it?
Yeah. I'd love to. So let's talk about the sequence you highlighted a moment ago. There was the original analog signal, and then came along 2G, 3G, 4G, and then of course this 5. So what is that? When you had an analog signal, remember we talked about the wave going by 1 second? It was relatively low, and it was a constant load. That is, let me put it this way: if you take a piece of concrete and you take a steel bar that has 10,000 pounds on it, and you put it on top of the concrete, and you keep that 10,000 pounds on that concrete constantly, not pulsing it, constantly keeping that load, the concrete won't break. That's a constant load. Well, when 2 to 4G came along, they were, you had this wave, the RF signal, but now all of a sudden you had information within the signal, digital information. That digital information is on, off, on, off, on, off. So if I take that analogy I gave you a moment ago, which is the concrete with the 10,000 pound load, now I start lifting it and dropping it down, lifting it and dropping it. What happens? It breaks the concrete. Well, that's what 2 to 4G did. It actually had the ability to break the cell down because it went to a digital format. And we know when you encode that stuff the way you encode it actually impacts the cell differently. We know that from our research work. So we know that the digital part of the signal, along with the frequency rate, is what is impacting our cells and creating all the challenges we have today. So that's up to 4G. And remember, I mentioned 1 gigahertz is a billion signals per second. Remember, we talked about that before. A hertz is 1 cycle per second. A billion is a billion. A hertz is a billion cycles per second. So now all of a sudden we go to 5G. What is 5G? 5G is 2 fundamental principles. Well, let's talk about what it's being touted as being. 5G is the best thing sliced bread since sliced bread that will allow you to communicate with anything or anybody you want anytime. There's the Internet of Things you may have heard of that's talked about is being this wondrous world that's going to open up to us by having this high speed. As a side note, if I want to watch a movie on my cell phone, or I want to check my the scores of the latest baseball game, I can go on that and get all the data I need anytime I want. So the whole set of Internet of Things, I'm not sure I fully understand the argument, although I know what their argument they're making. It doesn't necessarily make too much sense to me. They're going from 1 gigahertz to roughly 23 gigahertz, 23 times more speed per second than 1 gigahertz. So it's really, really fast. In other words, it's 1/3 the speed of an X-ray.
Oh my gosh.
What's an X-ray? An X-ray is a terahertz. It's the next bunch more. And remember, when you go to the dentist, Ashley, they put this heavy, heavy thing on your chest. They put this thing into your mouth and they run away and they push a button. What's going on? Well, there's an X-ray that's being generated to get that tooth view, and they don't want to be radiated. And they put a lead weight of blanket on you to protect you from that ray. That is known as a ionized radiation. An ionized radiation is something where, if you think of a molecule, it has a nucleus and electrons. An X-ray is powerful enough to take that electron and knock it out of its orbit and charge it. That's the mechanical breakdown of the cell that causes the cancer almost instantaneously with excess exposure of X-rays. That's why there's a whole bunch of caution. Now, all of a sudden, 5G comes along, and we're in a space where we have virtually no study work whatsoever, and it's 1/3 of an X-ray when it's fully formed at 100 gigahertz. So there is a lot of concern that this much more significant speed that is going to be used to carry the content is so much more faster, we have absolutely no understanding what we'll do. But here's the other kicker. Remember we talked about the concrete and the static 10,000 pounds on that concrete won't break? Then we talked about the 2 to 4G, how there's digital information on, off. That's likely the mechanics or one of the mechanics that actually damages the cell. Well, 5G uses 2 data sources within the transmission. In other words, there's 2 forms of information being sent and received, multi-in, multi-out. Let's say your husband says to you, I want to fill the kiddie pool up and I want to do it fast. So you run out, you get the kiddie pool and you bring your hose out and you start filling that water, and your husband says, I don't want to do this by next week. I need it today. So you go get a second hose and you put that hose in. You have multiple in now to the pool, and it's filling twice as fast. So the way in which they're increasing the speeds is by not only increasing the frequency range, but they're also doubling the content that's within the carrier. So that's what is fairly alarming, given we know when we muck around with the encoding and decoding, having multiple sources can't be any better than one. It's most likely twice as bad or more. We just don't know. So we know that about the 5G, which is the new generation of technology that we're being asked to do. But here are some other facts that we know for sure it's true. If you were to want to do a crowd control, it's around 20 gigahertz they use that they sonically send to you, and all of a sudden you get headaches and the crowds disperse because of it. That is called active denial. That is around 20 gigahertz. And that same stuff that they're using in as a means of crowd control is now being used to communicate your cell phone call. So that's a little bit of an indication that we know that when you get at that frequency range, we know that there are clear kinds of complications that occur to the body, and they use it as a crowd control. And I mentioned to you that there's highly more likelihood of blood-brain barrier breakdown. And so where before we had this hypersensitive group that's growing, that likely is going to accelerate over time, because we know the blood-brain barrier is more susceptible at the 23 gigahertz than it is at the 1 gigahertz. Because these speeds are so fast, you can't go very far. Like your cell phone, when you use your cell phone, Ashley, it goes about 5 miles, up to 5 miles, and you can communicate, everything works, and you can talk. But when you talk about this 5G technology that's so fast, it really can't go very far. In fact, it can't get any more than 850 feet, roughly. So you have a cell tower every 850 feet or so.
I've heard that. I've heard that it's about the size of a watermelon, and they're gonna put it on like every second light pole.
Yeah,
in your neighborhood,
and you can't stop it. The federal legislation about this is they're using right of ways, and they can stick that up. They don't have to go to local municipalities for approval for those installs. They can just do it. And so there's that. But here's an interesting point. Remember, I actually didn't mention this. If you're within 1,000 feet of a cell phone tower, you're 3 times more likely to have cancer.
Wow.
Point of fact, we've had several studies recently that have made that conclusion. And so here we know it's likely you're three times more likely to have a cancer of some sort. It's going to be 850 feet. It's going to be next to your bedroom, and it's constantly transmitting. The impact of that, we don't know.
We're being experimented on.
Yeah, that's right. You're part of the experiment. Hopefully you'll do okay. We don't know yet.
But you said that they use the sound cannons that they use to control riots is 20 would you say did you say 20 hertz, or is it megahertz? Gigahertz. So 20 gigahertz is the sound cannon that they use to give people headaches so they disperse.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And 5G network is 23.
Right. Exactly. And you probably have been watching the news. Certainly some of your audience has. Remember about a year ago, there was these, our representatives in Cuba in our embassy.
Yes, I do. I remember that we made nice with Cuba, and then the U.S. Embassy, everyone went there. The staff, right? The government, the U.S. government went there, and they started going blind, having migraines, having brain damage, and it was found that there was some unseen attack. Cubans, whether it was the Cuban government or whomever, was beaming cannons, these sound
Right,
cannons at these people, and you can't like hear it. Like a sound cannon isn't like, a blasting my stereo at you.
right,
It's just all of a sudden they would lose go blind, lose their hearing, get migraines, like have brain damage. And so they ended up shutting that down and bringing all the government people back because they didn't know where it was coming from. They didn't know who was attacking them.
right.
They couldn't protect the U.S. Government workers anymore. Do you know any more details around that
Yeah,
story?
that is RF microwave. There was no question about it when we saw that. We knew instantly that's what they were doing. Given we have the understanding of the thought. And in fact, there's a Dr. Tower. He was a physicist who worked in the British Army, and his job was to create microwave weapons. And what he did was he looked at the frequency range and the duration and the magnitude of that duration to determine if you're going to get a headache or you're going to have an eye fall out. I mean, he could literally predict what will happen to you based on the radiation that you are getting at that level. And so this is used in warfare, in other words, at these rates. And so when we go to this experimental phase and we start using these frequency ranges that we have not been used in the past and we've been restricted out of those spaces, all of a sudden we're being offered that space as a way of improving our lifestyle. And as I mentioned before, I'm not sure it's my lifestyle that thinking about improving. One last thing about this stuff, by the way, when you get irradiated with a 4G or less, we talked about the immune system being suppressed to some extent. Generally speaking, the bacteria and virus within the body, they seem to remain somewhat balanced. When you go to 23 gigahertz, you actually have a more rapid growth of virus and bacteria. So it's a known fact that it propagates health within the bacteria virus space and diminishes our health at the same time. So it's like it's worse than your cell being impacted. It's now radiating your body to the extent where it's imbalancing the bacteria and virus within the body. So none of us are smart enough to know what the answer is on 5G because none of us have studied it anywhere in the world. There is no scientific research that has occurred in that 23 gigahertz space. None. All we can do as scientists is sort of predict based on what we know of previous technologies to simply say it's not, it is worse than what we have. How far it is, we don't know.
To put it another way, they have not done any testing to prove this is safe for a population, and it was approved by the US government to allow the cell phone companies to start creating 5G networks and putting these watermelon sized 5G emitters every, two light posts
Right.
down our street, so everyone is bathed constantly in the 23, sorry, was it
Gigahertz.
frequency, when we're used to like 1 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, like we're
Right.
right down
Exactly.
there. And we started off by talking about how dangerous and how many studies are around these weaker frequencies are hurting us, and now we're going to this mega frequency.
Right.
There's been no safety studies, and what's really scary we trust that our government, we pay our tax dollars to trust that our government is supposed to protect us, right? We think, well, that's what the government's there for, is to protect the population. But they're not doing that.
No, actually, let me reinforce that. Let's talk about the standard again. that was created somewhat 30 years ago by the FCC. That standard was a penetration of 1 inch and a heating up of 2 degrees, right? That's what the standard was established. The strength of the signal, the power of the signal can't increase the temperature by 2 degrees.
So they're okay with doing that though.
They never considered the biological impact. When you talk about frontal lobe cancer, that's been growing 2% compounded every year for the last 10 years. That's a biological impact. It's certainly not a thermal impact. So the standard itself never concerned itself with the cancers that were being created by the signal, only the heat increase in the body. So, like, if you think that you're protected now because the government's going with 5G, they didn't protect you before, and it appears there may be more to be concerned about with this new technology than we had in the past technologies. So that's a point of fact. One of the things I want to point out, which is the financial motivation of the cell phone industry on 5G. Let's talk about that a tiny bit. Mm-hmm. You got to remember that that industry as a whole is probably worth somewhere around $17 trillion globally. It's a big chunk of money being made by a lot of people. So there's a lot of interest in continuing that cash flow in their businesses and growing that cash flow with new products and services. And while doing it, you want to reduce costs to provide that service. Well, what does 5G do for you? It eliminates the cable plant. It eliminates the high cost. Some of the highest costs of maintaining as a service provider is the cable in the ground, is the cable in the wires. So what 5G allows them to do is eliminate a lot of that last mile wiring, which that's what they call it. And so they improve the maintenance costs annually, reducing them, and they increase potentially the cost by putting these tiny little cells 850 feet away. And by the way, let's say you and I want to go start a telephone company, and we want to sell cable service. We want to sell you the health and wellness cable channel using our cable company to do it. How would we do that? If we had a cell phone company? Well, the way we would do it is we'd install 5G, and we'd have 5G connect to the router in the home, connect to the termination within the house of the cable service. That becomes a 5G. So it all becomes wireless, and there's no wire to install. And with 5G, because the speeds are so high, you can have all the bandwidth you need to provide those services. So now, where you and I were being forced to compete with a cable company that had a coaxial cable to the house, now all you got to do is put a cell tower up and you can beat them. So there's a lot of financial shifting that's going on within the telecom space for advantage by using these technologies. That's why there's an industry so interested in moving to this technology. It's not clear to me that there's advantages that are substantial for the user, but certainly for the provider there is.
That makes sense, because our internet's fast enough. Everyone,
right.
like you said, you go on your phone, you want to check the baseball game, or you want to watch a movie on your phone or your laptop or whatever. Everything's fast enough.
Right.
It's not for the end user, it's for the cable company to save money. And they have enough money, just like the pharmaceutical companies, they have enough money to pay off government. And every government's corrupt. I don't care what country you're in, because people are corruptible. And I know that sounds kind of dark, but look at the lobbying efforts that have kept these industries wealthy and have not really been helping us, the public.
There is so much money in play. You're not spending your money to protect yourself. Period. I'm not spending money to protect myself. Assuming your federal government is, I'll tell you the story. Here's a story. The 5G was approved by the FCC a year ago. There was a guy by the name of Wheeler that actually was the head of the FCC. Well, Wheeler, for 30 years previous to the FCC, he was the head of a consortium, the cell phone consortium. He represented all the service providers for years and years and years. He then went to the FCC and was head. To me, that's putting the fox into the henhouse.
That's just like with the pharmaceutical companies. We have,
Yeah.
major executives in pharmaceutical companies will leave the pharmaceutical companies and get hired by the
Yeah.
FDA to work for the FDA, and then quit the FDA and go back to work for the pharmaceutical companies. So they just it's the FDA. There's a really blurred lines between the government agencies that are supposed to protect us, like the FDA and the FCC, and the telecommunication companies and the big pharma. It's really sad. It's really scary. And it comes down to, because I know at this point I would feel powerless, right? Because we as individuals can't do anything, but we as individuals together can do something. And so we need to start by protecting ourselves and taking actions to protect ourselves. And then we need to get vocal and contact, whomever in our local government, and see what we can do as the masses, because we are the 99%. We can overthrow things, together. We can make change together, but we have to start by being proactive with the changes, the little changes, the reasonable little changes that we can make. So I want to talk about that and the strategies that we can do. But first, I really want to just touch on your book, Radiation Nation: Your Complete Guide to EMF Safety and Protection. I'm making sure that the links to everything that Daniel does is in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com. Can you please tell us a bit about your book, and
Yeah.
who is it right for? Who should read it?
That was written out of frustration, Ashley. It was written out of frustration because for me, when I looked at the research as a scientist, it was a preponderance of evidence that was pretty directional. This is not so good for us. Yet, we didn't know it as a population, in general population. And we were confused about what this stuff was. We were trying to bring up our families in a changing environment. New pollutants that were all of a sudden becoming part of our environment that didn't exist even 10 years ago. And so I was frustrated because I didn't see that kind of simple understanding of what the issue is and a simple understanding of what maybe the things you can do about it. And it was also clear to me that the researchers of the world were not talking to the clinicians of the world. And so that book was to try to close those gaps. And who is it written for? For my mother, for her daughter. It was written for the people that are making decisions in our lives. And I needed to try to help them understand what the problem was and the things they could actually do, because we're not victims. We can take actions, and simple actions can have a substantial change to the way these can potentially impact us. So the book was about, here's what we currently know. It was written for the layperson that's not a scientist, not an educated expert in some electronic field. It was written for the average person to understand the environment they're living in. Ironically, believe it or not, I mentioned Dr. Ali Johansson out of Sweden. He actually called me about the book, and he said, I actually learned something. And he's been doing this for 30 years,
That's so cool.
They didn't talk to me. There was Dr. Prasad is probably one of the most well-known radiologists in the world. And he deals with ionized radiation. That was his space, world leader. He called me about the book. He said, I can't believe a non-ionizing radiation can have similar damage as an ionized. And I said, yes, all you got to do is look at the facts. We know it's different to some extent, but you always got to remember, a cell's a cell. It doesn't invent a different way of responding to a toxin. It responds to a toxin in different toxins in the same way. So ionized radiation is one form of toxin, a non-ionized is another form. The cell still has mechanical breakdown similar, it just is over time differences. That's it. So we actually closed the gap in the research space as well, I think. And that was really the motivation of the book. It was, I don't know if you noticed, I don't talk about my company in this book. I had no interest of trying to sell product. My interest was to try to help people understand the issues of the day and stimulate conversation. That's what our goal was.
Oh, well, congratulations. It sounds like a fantastic book. I'd love to get into some actionable steps that you teach in the book. What can you teach us today so that we can start to lessen the amount of radiation we're being exposed to?
Very simple stuff, by the way, and we've alluded to it quite a number of times today. When you have a cell phone against your head, you may want to think about that as the worst exposure you can have from a cell phone. If you take that same cell phone and you take it 1 foot away from your head, 80% of the potential danger of that signal is gone. By 4 foot, 98%. In other words, it's a logarithmic function. The power drops off so fast that distance is your friend. And it's easy to do. By simply moving something and moving away from you by a little bit, there's a real benefit to the potential negative impacts it has in your body. So that's one aspect. Duration. If you put a cell phone to your head and it's there for 3 minutes and you hang up, you'll live to be 1,000. You're not going to be impacted from that signal exposure. If you use it for several hours and you have a blood-brain barrier breakdown, there's going to be a cancer likely to be caused in the frontal lobe, because the more you have that exposure, the more likely it has time to start beating at the door of the cell and breaking that cell down. So time and distance is your friends, and you need to think about simple things like that, and simply taking your laptop and putting it a foot or two away from you, your cell phone a foot or two away from you. Just by putting a little bit of distance away from you, you are really, really much safer. Here's a good way of thinking about how you manage stuff. Think about in a room, if I have one bee in a room, that one bee won't kill me. If I have 1,000 bees in the room, I can die. So it's a cumulative in a sense that the levels of power that are being generated from our technologies increases the more we have them in the same room. So eliminate bees in the room. Simple little coaching, eliminate bees in the room. In other words, if you have a cell phone on and it has a cell tower connection, a Wi-Fi connection, and a Bluetooth connection, those are 3 transmitters that are entering into that room. Do you need all three? No. I only have the cell tower connection. I don't have Wi-Fi. I don't have Bluetooth. Why? I don't need them. On the rare occasion, if I do need them, I'll turn them on. But simply the action of turning off that B, those two Bs, I reduced 2/3 the exposure within the room simply by turning those off. In other words, the less of these transmitting devices within a room, the more likely you are to be more safe. When you have your box that you have next to your TV that's connected to your router, you can connect it with a Ethernet port. So your Amazon box, your Google box, all these boxes that you can put to your TV, they're connected. You can connect them with an Ethernet. So you don't have to have the Wi-Fi on. You can use the Ethernet. So a general practice is, if you can eliminate the Wi-Fi transmission, do it. Reduce the number of bees in the room. So if you think about it in that general sense, it's easy. Simply reduce those transmitters in the room, and that minimizes exposure. Moving it a short distance away is an improvement if you have it in the room. If you can avoid it, never put it to your head. Put it in your hand and speakerphone, or use earbuds to connect. That's much safer. The distance away from those transmissions are now 2 feet away, not on top of your head. So little simple things like reducing the number of bees in the room, and when using the technology, keep it at a minimum and duration, and when not using, make sure you have them far enough away. Very simple things you can do.
Is there a device we can buy that measures the hertz? So like kind of measures the amount of bees in the room, or measures I know that there's I've seen these before where people have like a handheld device that they put up to their phone, and it's their needle is going crazy, or it's a digital thing and it's reading something. But I mean, would it be worth it for us to invest in something that sort of reads the RF or the EMF in the rooms to help us understand?
Honestly, I don't particularly care for those things because they're so imprecise and they can scare you so much, and there's really not much to be concerned about. They're very, very inaccurate typically, so they're potentially an indicator. And to answer your question, there are actually 2 types of devices you need. Remember we talked about 300 hertz and below? That's 1 meter kind of thing you got to get. And then you need one that can look at the RF. But you got to make sure that they not only can look at the 2.4 gigahertz and the 1 gigahertz, that it can also see the 8 or the 5 gigahertz from a router. So it gets a little bit complicated. And you know what? I'm not sure you should spend the money. If you're diligent about reducing the number of bees in the room, that's more than sufficient to make sure you're protected. And by the way, remember we talked about the extremely low frequency stuff. When you have a light bulb on, there is current running in the wall with the wire that's coming through the wire. Don't sit next to a wall. Stay a little bit away from the wall and you're fine. When you toast use your toaster and toast a piece of bread, don't stand on top of the toaster. There's milligauss that are being generated out of that machine that are pretty high. But if you're a little bit away from it, there's nothing to worry about. So you get a nice toast and piece of bread with butter and you're all set. And you're still safe. Simply knowing that any electronic device can generate it, the extremely low frequency stuff, you can avoid it. You don't have to be on top of it. And for those that are intentional connections, make sure you minimize your time using it. And when using it, make sure the durations are short and you should be safe.
Sal LaDuca, when I had him on the show, shared some stories that just shocked us. No pun intended,
Right.
about like people who had sleep issues, major sleep issues, and he came in and he unplugged everything near, like on the
Yeah.
wall near their any if there's a lamp plugged in, don't have it plugged in anywhere near your bed because your bed is metal springs. And there were children who had really hard time sleeping, had nightmares all the time.
Yeah.
He unplugged everything near the crib. We did that the second I got off of that interview. I went into our bedroom, unplugged absolutely everything, from the walls, anywhere near our beds, and I noticed a difference in my sleep. And he has his clients notice a huge difference. He said there was this town in Arizona where everyone was hearing a humming noise. And
Yeah.
it was because he said that, we always kind of think that everything, energy is always just constant and the same coming into our house, the power coming into our house. But it can be, these transformers can be off, and power going to an
Yeah.
entire neighborhood can be off to the
Oh
point
yeah.
of causing sickness, causing insomnia, causing dizziness. And the whole neighborhood's having these problems, but only when they're at home. And there's this entire town was hearing a humming because when they would sit in their bed or sit by their desk and they were, near the electrical outlets, their body was picking up that frequency that
Yeah. 60 hertz.
was not healthy, was
Yeah.
yeah, out of range of being normal and healthy. So you're absolutely right, we need to be careful of that as well. You mentioned Bluetooth. Is wearing Bluetooth headphones not a good alternative to having the phone to your ear because it's also a Wi-Fi, like a signal?
You remember what I mentioned to you about the blood-brain barrier being down,
Mm-hmm.
and the power level that mutated the cell was dot one.
Mm-hmm.
Remember I mentioned that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a Bluetooth is dot three.
Oh
It's
shoot.
3 times higher. So in general, you're probably going to be okay, but we know for sure it does impact and mutate the cells, even at the lowest of levels. I had a yoga teacher who came and she had this wrist thing on, talking to uh, her her cell phone, and she was really really proud of it. And it was a constant transmission between the two, which was using a Bluetooth. I looked at her and I said, "What are you, nuts? You know that this is what I do, and that you're so conscious of your health. Why would you expose yourself to unnecessary signal if there's no reason to? So if you're burning calories, not the wisest choice." And she promptly took it off. But you don't realize that even the littlest can impact the hypersensitive. Um, we've known people who can't even leave their house. It's so bad. It can get really, really severe for some people. And managing the bees in the room becomes really, really, really important for their basic um, quality of life. So you never wanted to get that extreme because there's very little you can do. But even the smallest of signals should be turned off if you don't need it. I had an interview. I was on a show once, and and I could tell that I don't want anything in the bedroom. For example, you really don't want cell phones, even clocks. If you're going to have a clock, have it 3 or 4 foot away from you. Even if it's a digital clock that's battery operated, which is less harmful. You really don't want any of those things because they do interfere with the melatonin. It disrupts melatonin. The process of creating melatonin is disrupted. We know that for sure. And so I was telling her, manage the bees in that room, and she was polite, and we continued moving on. And then about 4 or 5 months later, she called back up and said, "I'd like to have another chat with you if you have the time." I said, "Sure, of course." And on the show, she says, "I didn't believe you when you were telling me the first time. My husband and I went and took everything out, and we now can sleep." So
Mm-hmm.
they actually could feel the difference by taking some simple actions.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's talk about the simple actions of some of your products because I'm a believer, especially the headphones. I actually have those, not your brand, because again, I didn't know that your brand existed at the time that I got these, but I got these EMF radiation free air tube headphones. And my husband was we're both audiophiles. We love, we're very into high quality sound, and I just could not wear just regular, like the kind of the earbuds that come with the cell phone is just too, it just is not good, robust sound to me. I was so surprised, and so was my husband, that the air tube headphones were such good quality. I thought that was really cool. And so I like yours have a great price. I think I paid more for mine, and yours, obviously they have great ratings. You've got 55-star ratings on your website. Um, so
They are the best on the market.
someone could use these in to replace having a phone near their head.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we invented it. Because a lot of people want to listen to music, for example, or they um, want to they don't want to even begin exposing their head to it, so they'll buy the earphone earbuds we produce, and they're a high fidelity, the highest fidelity you can buy in the market right now, and they rival any of the high quality products you can buy anywhere else that are wired or Bluetooth based. But what's different is you're protected. We eliminated the emission completely. That 1.1 watts per kilogram is gone.
Very
There's nothing
cool.
there.
How long? I mean, I'm looking at one of the pictures on the website. Looks quite long. How long is the cord? How many feet away could you potentially be talking on with the headphones and have the cell phone away from your body?
About 4.5 foot.
Oh, that's perfect because you said 98% of the
Yeah, yeah,
radiation is drops off when you have it 4 feet away.
yeah, right.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, I'm seeing here you have cell phone cases, laptop shields, tablet and iPad cases. Can you walk us through like what would we which what let's say everyone has like a laptop or a tablet, like what should be the if you recommended one product, if that would be the most protective or the what's the one thing that everyone should get that to give them the biggest bang for their buck?
I would suggest the earbuds because they totally eliminate emissions from you, and it can be used for anything that you may have. Um, Particularly with cell phones, because so many people have cell phones. But believe it or not, a close second is, and I'm sure you're aware of this, the blue light component of the spectrum
Mm-hmm.
is pretty dangerous. Um, you can have premature macular degeneration, and believe it or not, you can have dry eye. I had um, we work with a lot of physician groups, and one of them had a patient that had been using drops in their eyes for 20 years, and I sent them out a glasses we build that actually cut out the blue component of the spectrum that comes off your tablet or your monitor, your TV, and for 20 years she walked around putting stuff in her eye because her eyes were always dry and they were bloodshot. Within 2 hours, all of that disappeared. It was they were fixing the symptom, not the cause. The cause was the blue light component of the spectrum, which, as you may know, is the just below the ultraviolet light, which causes cancer on certain conditions. So it's almost as bad. But we do know that that's an important one, particularly for kids, because kids are using this stuff when they're 6 years old. Um, but our goal has been to try to develop products that mirror the portability of technology we want around us. So we have cell phone cases using the same technology I developed for the original laptop case, for when you put a laptop on your lap or a tablet on your lap, you can put that. We have cases for your tablets, small or large. We have universal cases for that. We have, when you travel a lot, your data can be stolen and robbed from you by somebody walking by you. Because we are experts in shielding, we actually have a device that totally shields your credit cards, your cell phones, any electronic device that can be scanned. We have a product that shields that.
Yeah, the RFID, now that all of our bank cards and credit
Yeah,
cards and
yeah.
driver's license and passports have RFID chips in them. My husband bought one of those RFID blockers for his wallet because we've heard of people that they will just walk by you with the device and their device reads and steals your data. You don't even have to take your credit card or your driver's license out of your pocket, and your identity and all your credit cards have been stolen. And you could, well, and it's been in your pocket the whole time. So I really believe, since it's like we have to protect ourselves, and that's, I mean, that, I think everyone should have an RFID blocker in their wallet or purse. That's just, it goes without saying. That's a mandatory. I think everyone should have that. You have some really neat cases that actually become like sort of like flip phones. When someone closes the cell phone case, can the cell phone still get a phone call? Like, does it
Yeah,
block the
yeah,
signal?
yeah. Well, remember we talked about an omnidirectional signal?
Mm-hmm.
Remember we talked about a little ball that grows bigger and bigger and bigger? What we do is, when the transmitter is transmitting, trying to connect to the cell tower, it's also trying to connect to your head. We just stop it. When you use our cell phone cases, we actually have a barrier that we have between the transmitter and your head. And there is no signal that can pass through and damage the cell, damage the body in any way, because we stopped it. We eliminated it. And that's what we do on all our devices, actually. We just simply take it in a direction that is dangerous to the body, and we allow it to be unimpeded as it goes to the destination, whether the router, the cell tower, whatever it may be. We have a device that simply shields. It's not a complicated device. It's technically complex, but the way in which we do it is fairly simple idea.
So it blocks the signal from going all directions, meaning going into our body.
Right. Anything that's going into your body is stopped. Anything that's going out is still allowed to go out. So it's eliminating the exposure to the body. Anytime you have any of our devices, cell phones, tablet, laptop, sleeves. We have sleeves in which you can put your portable laptop in, small laptop. We have shielding, so anytime you're using it close to your body, you're protected.
Wonderful. I like this pad, the laptop pad. So someone could, if they wanted to have their laptop on their lap, could just put the pad in between them and the laptop
Yeah,
to
yeah,
protect
right.
them.
Actually, it was a funny story. I've gone through the airports and security, and they've stopped me because I had a couple of my defender pads in, and they thought I was hiding something. Even though we don't do X-ray stuff, we actually diminish the ability of the X-ray to go pass through, because it's a wave, and
Mm-hmm.
we're preventing that wave from passing through. And so, interesting, funny story. On occasion, we have been stopped.
When you go through the airports, do you opt out of the scanners and go
Oh
for
yeah,
a body check?
particularly when they use the X-ray. They're now using microwave, by the way, and it's only a short spurt. But when they did the X-ray, those machines were typically not calibrated.
Mm-hmm.
So you had excess, more likely than not, than the standard signal levels. And it was an X-ray. It was an ionized signal that was knocking the electron out of its orbit. It was like terrible that they were using that stuff. I know the airports are trying to get away from that stuff, but in general, a microwave is also harmful, although they'll tell you it's not. The only saving grace you have, it's quick. It's because it's quick, it's less likely to have an impact to your body.
Unlike that 5G, which is constant,
Right. That
right?
is really scary
And
stuff.
that it's one third the basically the speed of an X-ray, but it's happening all the time. Imagine if I slowed down an X-ray machine one third and then had it constantly beaming at you. No one would agree to that. And that's
Right,
what
exactly.
5G is. No one would agree to that.
But by the way, there was a Dr. Court that I work with, one of the physicians we work with, and he was out in Portland. One Saturday morning, he calls up and he says, "My head is hurting." He's electric hypersensitive. He's a wonderful guy. He really helps those who are electrically hypersensitive. And he called me up and he says, "My head is really, really bothering me." He had just gotten this new cable service in his place in the mountains. And so I said, "Go look at the router and tell me what it says on the bottom." And he went and looked and it said 5G. So within an hour of it being active, he couldn't have it on anymore. That's how impactful it was for him. I'm not sure that's going to be the general population, but certainly in his case, he couldn't deal with that constant load that you were just mentioning.
I'm predicting that you're gonna start coming out with like hats and like you're just gonna start selling the tinfoil hats. I'm just telling you, like I'm gonna come to you and say, okay, I want you to take your Defender Pad laptop EMF radiation shield and turn it into a little, a little parka thingy I can pull down over my head and shoulders and spinal cord and protect myself from the 5G.
You know, a Better Call Saul, the television show.
Yes,
There
yeah.
was there was this lawyer brother who was a hypersensitive. He used to walk around with aluminum around his head. That was legitimate. Aluminum actually does conduct that RF away from the body, and so you're right. We're going to find ourselves all walking around with aluminum around our heads to try to protect ourselves.
Right. We'll all be the tinfoil hat wearers that we
Right,
are. Yeah, that's
right,
right.
right. Exactly, exactly.
I'm excited that you sell those blue light blocking glasses.
Yeah.
For someone who doesn't know what these are, that we've been talking about these glasses, I had James Swanwick on my show, and this was, I don't know, probably a year and a half ago, and he created Swanee's blue blocking glasses. I had never heard of them, but I'm one of the most like open-minded skeptics. So he started telling me about his, blue blocking glasses, and he basically said it's like wearing ski goggles. It's sort of orange. The whole world looks nice and orange.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, right. Okay. And he goes, no, 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 let me send you a pair. So he sent me a pair and I put them on. Normally I'd fall asleep around midnight. It's when I'd get tired. I could not stay awake before 9 a.m. I was just like, I put them on and I started to get sleepy and I'm like, I gotta go to bed, guys. Like it is like 8:50 and I'm like, my body's saying go to bed. I could not believe how effective blue blocking glasses work. And yours are really affordable compared to the other ones out there I've
Yeah,
seen.
we try to build the highest quality at the best price. By the way, the reason why that was the case, your circadian rhythm is not being disrupted. When you read at night and you look at those screens and that blue component's hitting your eye, it's really screwing around with your circadian rhythm, in addition to melatonin and all those other things.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's being disrupted because it's basically the strongest part of sunlight that
Mm-hmm.
you're now exposed to in your bedroom, and you can't sleep when it's highly sunny out. So yeah, there's a growing understanding of the importance of being careful about exposures of the blue component of the spectrum. I agree.
Absolutely. And in technology in general, which is what we've been discussing today. It has been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for creating these products that protect people. Thank you for creating your book to teach people how to become aware of what is potentially silently poisoning them and help them to defend themselves. I'd like to know, just before we get into wrapping it up, I do like to know Do you share on your website any science that you can prove to us that your products are
Yeah,
legitimate?
exactly. Go to the on DefenderShield.com. We probably have one of the most verbose library of content and its impact in our learning section. You can go there and you'll see the bio initiative, and you can get in contact with that data if you wanted. We talk about autism and this connection to RF, and that is becoming more and more well known. But 2 years ago, uh, we talked to deaf ears about this subject. But there's a lot of breakdown of the kinds of science we know about and the linkage to exposures to various ailments we have within our body. So if you don't look at anything else, you may want to go to that section just to learn a bit more about this kind of stuff. Learning more is your power about how you can choose to lead your life in a more balanced, more healthy way as it relates to this exposure, this toxin. It is a toxin in the air.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Is there anything else on your website that you think that the listeners should know? Any resources that you think would be a great place for them to check out?
The learning section is probably the most important. There are other sections we have about products and things like that, but I'd rather see you learn your problems in the environment you live in than sell you a product. I think it's more important that we try to figure our environment out and take action on how we want to deal with it. If you have a young family, for example, dealing with this exposure, as I said before, using a cell phone to a 6-year-old child goes completely through the head. So you have to be very careful of the bees in the room with children. They're more susceptible by 3 times an adult. These kinds of facts you can sort of get out of some of the references to the research that we know about. And I'm telling you, recently, there's been more information coming out than I have seen in the last 10 years. The research community is really stepping up, in my opinion. We're learning more about our health and the impacts of these toxins within our environment. So I encourage you to not only look at our work, but others that are also doing wonderful work, including Environmental Trust with Dr. Deborah. There's Dr. Carpenter doing the bio initiative, and he's been a leader in this stuff for a long, long time. There are a lot of things out there that you can learn and get a better understanding of how you want to impact that in your own life.
I love it. Thank you for giving us those resources. You also have a YouTube channel, Instagram, and Facebook, so we can check out that as well. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listener to wrap up today's show?
Actually, the Facebook, what we try to do is anytime we see anything that's current and important to know about research, go there. We try to keep that up to date every day. And so we're always posting about some of the most recent study work and the results of research that's been happening over the last days, if not weeks. So we try to keep up to date there. But beyond that, I've just been thankful that you've given us a chance to chat a little bit about this. I am passionate about this stuff. To me, it's we can do something about our environment we live in, and we should take actions to improve our health. And you need to know what it is that's starting it and what it is you can do to resolve it. By the way, one of the things as a side note, something we're also doing, I actually have brought together a group of researchers and the medical community to look at electrohypersensitivity. I've been so concerned about women being more impacted than men, growing quicker than it has been over the last few years. And so we actually have a group looking at hypersensitive. We have a neurologist, we have an ophthalmologist, some really world-renowned experts in these spaces, trying to help us better understand what it is we can do in our environment and what actions we can take. And watch our Facebook and look for these kinds of things that we are working on in the future. Well, by the way, do you know that if you're RF exposed and you're pregnant, you are 3 times more likely to have a miscarriage? So we have baby blankets coming out, we have wraps, all sorts of stuff coming out. I'm excited about that stuff.
Very cool. If you haven't already, you definitely want to connect with Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, because that's right up his alley. So the two of you could definitely collaborate on this kind of information.
Believe it or not, we actually, in one of those groups, a little side note, there was a very, very large cosmetic company, and they have a research community they work with. And we've invited them to be part of the group because we know that there are biomarkers for electric hypersensitive. And some of those biomarkers are actually within the skin and the dermis. And so we're actually trying to bring experts across the board to help better understand this environment. I thought it was interesting that the cosmetic industry ultimately now is beginning to understand that maybe this is the next bastion for them.
Ooh. Well, especially since the majority of their customers are women, and if the large percentage of women are affected by this, then they want to stay ahead of the curve and help their customers, because that will make more profit. I really believe in helping. Companies should help people, and profit comes because they help people, not how can I cut corners and screw people over and kill my customers by poisoning them to make money? Like, this is just ridiculous. I don't know how long, I don't know how many more generations these giant companies can keep poisoning us and we keep taking it. I think we're gonna come to a point where, as a population, we no longer stand for it. And I think I think where people are waking up now, especially listeners of the Learn Child podcast. We're waking up, and we're voting with our forks. We're voting with our dollars. We're putting our dollars towards what we believe in, and we will take our dollars away from what we don't believe in. And as a collective, we will make a change. And it all starts in the home. It all starts with protecting ourselves. So thank you, Daniel DeBaun, for helping us today to better understand how we can protect ourselves from these different forms of radiation that are so common and so widely accepted. Please, listeners, go to DefenderShield.com. Check out his book, check out all the free resources, and learn from the Learning Center there. And if you do want to buy anything from him, the blue blocking glasses or the cell phone cases or the radiation-free headphones, use the coupon code LTH to get 20% off. I'm not getting any money for this. I'm just really excited that you're giving such a huge discount to the listeners and helping all of us to gain a better health. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for inviting. I really appreciated the time with you. I think we really did have a chance to share with your listening audience some important stuff that's maybe even going to be more important in the recent future. So thank you again.
Are you looking to optimize your health? Are you looking to get the best supplements at the lowest price? For high quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com, and one of our fantastic True Health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program. Hello, True Health Seeker. I have a very exciting announcement. I have spent over a year, I've spent about 14 months collecting all of my information that I use with my clients for ending anxiety, and I created an online program. I'm very excited about it. We just launched it, And for you, for free, I have a webinar where I teach you 2 powerful mind tricks for removing anxiety, ending worry, and controlling fear so it stops controlling you and your life. In my free webinar, you will learn what causes anxiety and how to stop it, the science behind the mind-body connection, overcoming fear of public speaking, getting unstuck, ending that fear of things not working out, ending procrastination and overwhelm, and feeling excited, grounded, and calm instead of fear and worry. I have so much to teach you in my free webinar, and I'm really excited for you to come check it out. Go to freeyouranxiety.com/webinar. That's freeyouranxiety.com/webinar, or look in the show notes of today's podcast and you'll see the link there so you can jump into the webinar and learn all these wonderful, powerful tools that will end your anxiety and create excitement and happiness instead. Go to freeyouranxiety.com/webinar and sign up now, and I look forward to seeing you in the next live webinar.